election to be held since the general election in June. Ipswich is the place where people have been casting their vote, and we can go live there now and join our political correspondent, Laura Trevelyan. Laura, do you have turnout figures?
Well, yes, I do. The turnout is looking roughly between 35 and 40%, but I have to say the huge news here tonight in Ipswich is the fact that the local team have beaten those giants of the Italian Premiership, Inter Milan, 1-0 in the third round of the European Cup. The whole place is going absolutely crazy for the result, and the by-election is becoming a kind of really secondary matter. Now, 25,000 people went to see that match in Ipswich here tonight. The question is, how many people will have actually voted in the by-election? If the turnout is between 35 and 40%, probably about upwards of 25,000 people voted. So at least we don't have the humiliation of more people having watched the match than actually voted in the by-election. But Labour quietly confident that they've hung on here to this seat. The question really is who comes second. Now, I'm hearing that the result is not going to be particularly different to the one that were in the June election, which would mean the Conservatives would be in second place with the Liberal Democrats third. But if by any chance the Liberal Democrats were to overtake the Conservatives, that would be real humiliation for the Tories. This is, after all, Ian Duncan-Smith's first real test as new leader of the Conservative Party, and Ipswich has a habit of producing very unexpected results. This is the place when the whole nation was going Conservative in 1979, Ipswich stayed with Labour, but then similarly in 1987, the Conservatives gained this seat from Labour, so it has got an odd past. But it's all been a very exciting night apart from the football result, because we also had an amazing light show here by the council at 10 o'clock when the ballot boxes started to arrive. The councils, as councils tend to do at these by-election counts, trying to put themselves on the map. They want to try and increase voter engagement and participation. They're rather pleased with their light display because they even got an email from Alistair Campbell, the government's Director of Strategic Communications, congratulating them on their attempts to engage the voters. So, generally speaking, quite an exciting night here, and we're expecting the result probably by around 12:30ish.
Everything happening in Ipswich town. Many thanks, Laura. We'll be back to you later. Time for a very quick look at the markets, and here they are, I hope. Moving in. Our political correspondent, Laura Trevelyan's monitoring the progress of the count. Laura, to say the politicians have been upstaged tonight would be something of an understatement, wouldn't it?
Yes, the huge news here in Ipswich tonight is that Ipswich Town, the local football club, defeated the Italian giants Inter Milan in the third round of the UEFA Cup. A completely unexpected victory. Ipswich won 1-0, and that really has been the big story here. I have to say the by-election has been more than somewhat eclipsed by it. But this by-election, caused by the death of the Labour MP James Cann, who held the seat in the general election in June with a majority of just over 8,000. It does look as though Labour have hung on to the seat. They say they're quietly confident. It looks as though the Conservatives are still in second place, as they were in June. And it seems the change has been the Liberal Democrats are still in third place, but slightly closer behind than they were. But it has been also the turnout here tonight looking to be around between 35 and 40%. Now, bearing in mind that the turnout in the general election was 59%, pretty low. That's still low. It's really confirming that pattern of a low turnout in elections. But also another interesting innovation here tonight is, I don't know if you can see the set behind me, but there's been a real whiz-bang set put on by the council. We had a big display of lasers and light beams and all that sort of thing, and the council are really trying to engage the voters' attention here tonight, and they're very pleased because they got an email from no less a figure than Alistair Campbell, the Director of Strategic Communications at Downing Street. So the counting going on here, and we expect a result probably within the next half an hour.
When messages from Alistair Campbell are the most exciting thing about the campaign, you know, you have to be a little worried.
Well, I think actually the football has been the very exciting aspect of this campaign. And I think what's interesting is that 25,000 people went to the match tonight. It was completely sold out here in Ipswich. If the turnout is about 35%, that means about 26,000 people voted. So you've got similar numbers voting as going to the match. So that sort of shows you the kind of relative levels of interest, if you like. But it has been quite a low-key campaign. Ipswich is a funny seat though. It used to be marginal in 1979. This was a seat which defied the trend. It went Labour when the whole country was going Conservative. But then in 1987 it was one of the few seats that the Conservatives gained from Labour. So it does have a history of bucking the trend. Traditionally it's a marginal, but it hasn't been for the last two elections, and tonight that trend looks like being confirmed with Labour holding on to the seat.
OK, Laura, many thanks. We'll come back to you for the result. Headlines now at midnight. No surrender in...
Do you ever want more information?
Hello and welcome to a BBC News 24 by-election special. I'm Carrie Gracie. We're going to take a look at the scene in Ipswich now, where the ballots have closed and the last votes are being counted in the first by-election since the general election. And we're joined by our political correspondent, Laura Trevelyan, who's watching the action. Laura, we're expecting a result very shortly, aren't we?
Yes, we're expecting it reasonably soon. We haven't had a 5-minute warning yet, which you always get. What's happened is that the agents from the different political parties have been called in to have a look at all the spoilt ballot papers and argue about the final result. But I've got one figure, which is the turnout figure. That's been officially verified at 40.26% of the electorate turned out to vote. That's 27,500 people, roughly speaking. Now, 25,000 people here tonight in Ipswich attended the extraordinary football match between Ipswich Town and Inter Milan, which Ipswich actually won. So that just shows you that actually slightly more people voted than went to that football match. So not a bad result, given this is a by-election and given that there was that 59% turnout in the general election. It does look as though Labour have hung on to this seat. They won this seat in June with a majority of over 8,000 over the Conservatives. It looks as though the Conservatives have held on to that second place, with the Liberal Democrats in third place. But the Liberal Democrats perhaps a little bit closer to the Conservatives than they were in that general election in June. So that's the scene from Ipswich at the moment. We've got the turnout, 40.26%, and the result expected next 20 minutes or so.
And Laura, football aside, the politicians have been struggling to generate a lot of interest in this, haven't they?
Yes, they have struggled, but actually, 40.26% is not a bad result for the first by-election of the new Parliament. In the last Parliament, we had this catastrophic turnout at the Leeds by-election of only 19.6%, which was incredibly low, the lowest in a peacetime election. And that figure of 40.26 is a bit higher perhaps than one would have expected, given that this is winter, the nights are shorter, there was the added attraction of the football, if you like, the competing attractions. So this has been a very low-key campaign, but actually, people in Ipswich have noticed that there's a campaign going on, and they have turned out to vote, although not in the numbers that we would have expected to vote in a by-election 15 years ago.
And the nation at large seems to have noticed little other than the Prime Minister's spelling errors.
Yes, that's right. Of course, the Prime Minister, in a good luck note to the Labour candidate here, Chris Mull, said good luck tomorrow. And although Number 10 claimed he can spell tomorrow, it certainly looked like he didn't know how to spell tomorrow, and it had rather too many O's in it. So that was certainly quite a big story. But really, I have to say the big story of the campaign has been the football, because the football match was on the same day as the actual by-election. And really, the town here tonight went absolutely crazy when Ipswich won that match 1-0. It was quite extraordinary to be here, where the count is in the corn exchanges in the centre of town. People were streaming past outside. We were all watching the match here inside. Very exciting. So a good night for Ipswich, certainly for the football, and not bad for democracy. 40.26% is the turnout.
Well, we'll come back to you in a few minutes to see whether the political activists can generate that kind of response. Laura, many thanks. Now, of course, we will be straight back to Ipswich for the result as soon as it comes, but first, the day's other main stories. Fierce fighting has broken out in the northern Afghan city of Kunduz. It follows earlier reports from the Northern Alliance that an agreement had been reached for the Taliban to surrender. Any deal seems to have failed because it didn't include guarantees for the foreign Taliban fighters in Kunduz. There are about 3,000 foreign fighters in the city, with an estimated Taliban garrison of 15,000 men. The alliance forces encircling the city say they'll now get the Taliban out by force. US bombers have continued their pounding of the area. Fighting's also been continuing in the hills near Kabul, with alliance troops trying to flush out the last remaining Taliban forces. Meanwhile, the International Committee of the Red Cross says that up to 600 bodies have been found in Mazar-e-Sharif following its capture by the Northern Alliance.
Forget a negotiated surrender. These Northern Alliance soldiers were racing into battle, having been ordered to take Kunduz by force, the last northern stronghold of the Taliban.
For the freedom of my country, I'm ready to fight, and our troops are ready for battle.
Perhaps it was too much to hope for that the siege of the city would end peacefully, and these Katyusha rockets signalled the start of the bombardment. We've been moved right back from the front line because of intense firing from Taliban positions. It may be that they're about to surrender, but they're showing every signs of wanting to make a last fight of it. And so more and more Northern Alliance troops are being rushed up to the front now. In a day of confusion, chaos and contradiction, some Afghan Taliban fighters, around 200, did indeed drive up to the front line and turned themselves in, raising hopes that this could all be sorted out without violence. But out of a force estimated at 20,000, this was not enough. This man said he was part of a convoy of 15 cars to come over to the Northern Alliance side. But the foreign fighters have not turned themselves in. And so the B-52s were called in again to carpet bomb Taliban positions to persuade them to accept that their cause was hopeless. This evening, the picture in Kunduz remains unclear. One source said the Taliban have surrendered, but the fighting goes on. They may still hold the city, but surely not for much longer. John Sopel, BBC News, Northern Afghanistan.
Meanwhile, further south, Taliban fighters are still locked in a rearguard action not far from the capital, Kabul. 1,000 of them, including hundreds of foreign volunteers, are holding out on a ridge.
For days there had been peace talks in Maidan Shah. Village elders tried to mediate, but the Taliban would not surrender. Deadlines for them to do so came and went. So today the Northern Alliance decided it was time to stop talking and start fighting. Early morning, and they rush fresh supplies of ammunition up to the front line, just half an hour's drive from Kabul. Northern Alliance tanks roll into action, and the infantry too advance into battle, their mission to drive out the Taliban and their Arab allies, now fighting a last stand in the hills and valleys around Maidan Shah. The Northern Alliance open fire, and at first it looks as though the battle is going their way. The smoke here is coming from a Taliban anti-aircraft gun that's taken a direct hit. There are cheers on the front line, and the Alliance keep up their onslaught. But suddenly things start to go wrong. We hear bullets whistling towards us. The Taliban are counter-attacking from another flank, and Northern Alliance troops retreat in disarray. They march to the top of the hill, now they're marching down again, or rather running for their lives. In this corner of Afghanistan, the Taliban are not finished yet, and the Northern Alliance look distinctly vulnerable.
Ferocious fighting has been raging here for several hours now, but the Northern Alliance troops are beginning to pull back. They've met much stiffer resistance than they expected from the Taliban fighters and the Arabs just up on the hills behind me.
The retreating soldiers are weary and dejected. This one tells me his best friend has just been shot dead right next to him in a trench, hit in the mouth by a sniper's bullet. He shows me the blood on his waistcoat where he carried his fallen comrade's body. Of course, I hate the Taliban more and more each day, he says. My friend had a wife and 5 children. As for the Northern Alliance commander in charge of this fiasco, he blames the Americans. I requested US airstrikes, says Haji Shir Alam, and I was promised there'd be some, but nothing happened. Tonight the commander is praying, perhaps for better luck on the battlefield. He's promised to fight on until the last of the Taliban are gone. Ben Brown, BBC News, Maidan Shah.
The Foreign Secretary Jack Straw gained limited support for the deployment of British troops in Afghanistan in talks in Iran with the Northern Alliance. In his second visit to the country since the September the 11th bombings, Mr Straw held talks with the Foreign Affairs spokesman of the Northern Alliance, Dr Abdullah Abdullah, and with the Iranian Foreign Minister Kamal Karazi. The talks were described as constructive. Mr Straw has now arrived in Pakistan on the next leg of his diplomatic mission. 50 firefighters were called to a fire at Peterborough Cathedral this evening. It's not known what caused the blaze, but thick smoke inside the building meant breathing apparatus and thermal imaging had to be used. The damage caused by the fire and smoke may run into millions of pounds.
The seat of the fire was relatively small, but inside this huge historic building, thick black smoke has left its mark on everything. The flames were seen licking at the side of this window by a cathedral verger, and he'd dialed 999 even before the fire alarm sounded. Firefighters turned out en masse.
The coincidence that led up to the verge of putting that call in are amazing. Speaking to him, he wasn't even supposed to be there. He saw the flickering flames from the window that I've just described, and without that call then, we'd have lost this pride and joy of Peterborough.
Much of the damage is still cloaked in darkness. Tonight we know the choir organ and this window have taken much of the fire damage. A rare medieval painted ceiling, which is a central part of the cathedral's £7 million restoration project, is a bigger worry.
You're talking millions, really. I mean, we've just spent £1.5 million on the nave ceiling, cleaning it. It's taken us 4 years. I would have thought it probably needs to be done again. That's my first reaction. I mean, I'm in shock, of course, so it may not be quite as bad as that, but I suspect it will need all cleaning all over again.
Some of the firemen here tonight have already dared to suggest it's a miracle that the fire didn't destroy the entire cathedral. As it stands, the damage will certainly run into thousands of pounds, maybe even millions. At the moment, no one here feels particularly lucky. A full fire investigation is now underway. Anthony Bartram, Peterborough.
A story in the Sun newspaper saying that the Prime Minister has decided to delay the date of the referendum on the euro until 2005 has been dismissed by Downing Street. A spokesman insists there's no change in the government's policy on the euro.
Downing Street this evening dismissed as totally erroneous the report in the Sun newspaper suggesting that Mr Blair had decided to hold a referendum on British entry into the euro on the same day as the next general election expected in 2005. The Sun reported that Mr Blair had privately signalled the decision late on Thursday.
The next step is clearly going to be a referendum at some time, and what we're saying is that he won't be able to do it during the Parliament because of the possibility of a domestic downturn and flagging in the support of the Labour government, and that the time that he's earmarked is the next election.
But a spokesman for Number 10 said that the government's policy remained that no decision on whether to call a referendum would be made until the completion of an assessment of the 5 conditions for entry set by the Chancellor Gordon Brown. Mr Blair has said the assessment will take place within the first half of this Parliament, but the spokesman said that it had not yet been carried out. In his speech later today, the Prime Minister is expected to warn that when deciding whether to join the euro, Britain must recognise the reality and importance of European cooperation. He will say that Britain's failure to be in the European Union when it started in 1957 was a great mistake. Mr Blair will also state that British politicians have allowed anti-Europeans to dictate the argument over the EU and the single currency. Jane Waugh, BBC News.
And the Conservative defence spokesman Bernard Jenkin has claimed the controversy over the euro has been deliberately created by Labour. He said the euro was unpopular and that any referendum would fail.
In the hearts of the British people, they don't want this. And if British people carry on seeing proof that we can prosper outside the euro, that we actually depend upon our independence as a country for our prosperity and indeed our security, then the government are going to lose that referendum. So the referendum campaign's already started. The timing of it's almost immaterial. But this is exactly the kind of controversy the government wants to generate, because they want to give the Prime Minister the opportunity to get up there and say, this is where we're going, this is the direction we're going in. And that's obviously what he's done in his speech tomorrow.
Bernard Jenkin. 2 men charged with carrying out bomb attacks in West London and Birmingham have appeared in court. Magistrates in London ordered that they be kept in custody. They were also charged with possession of explosives found in 2 farms in West Yorkshire. More from our crime correspondent Stephen Cape.
In a police convoy, the 2 men accused of the bombings were brought to Belmarsh Magistrates Court after they'd been questioned for days by the anti-terrorist branch. There was the usual tight security as they were escorted in.
The hearing lasted less than half an hour. The 2 men only spoke once in Irish accents to confirm their names. They were dressed casually. The court was packed. There's been huge national interest in this case. And then the charges were read out.
Both men were accused of conspiring to cause explosions likely to endanger life. Specifically, Noel Maguire is also charged with causing the March the 3rd explosion outside the BBC in West London. And the Ealing bomb 5 months later. Repair work is still underway. A second man, Robert Hume, was charged with the Birmingham bomb earlier this month. He's also charged with possession of explosives during searches at a farm in West Yorkshire, where it's alleged he had a timer power unit, 3 detonators, a revolver, ammunition and a grenade. In a separate development tonight, Yorkshire police, who've continued to search the farm and one nearby, made this appeal.
It's very important that we try and build a picture up of exactly who has been going to those premises and who has been coming away from those premises over that period of time. Because there are a lot of people who have been there for perfectly legitimate reasons.
At Belmarsh, the 2 men were remanded in custody. They'll be held in the prison next door. Their next appearance will be at the Old Bailey. Stephen Cape, BBC News.
This is BBC News 24. Now the headlines at 1:45. The result is expected shortly in the Ipswich by-election. No surrender in Kunduz. The onslaught continues against the Taliban, despite earlier hopes of a negotiated surrender. Downing Street denies claims in The Sun that Tony Blair wants a Euro referendum in 2005. The Premier League and Football League have begun legal proceedings aimed at stopping a strike by players in 9 days' time. The leagues say they're still hoping for a negotiated settlement, though. The disputes over how revenues should be shared out. Our sports correspondent David Eads reports.
Ipswich Town versus Inter Milan tonight, live on TV. The cameras were there for a famous Ipswich victory. These European competitions are just about the only ones which won't be affected by a players' strike, though, if it goes ahead. This evening, the various football leagues have taken to the courts to block it.
It is not the legal action that's going to resolve this. All that will do is will alter the bargaining position, and it will strengthen, positions and harden positions. However, we have to, to be prepared to go that route. We're still in negotiations. We want a negotiated settlement.
Some players are also ready to express their concerns in public. David James, who's recovering from injury, was one of very few to vote against a strike in the first place. He thinks the latest cash offer to the union has changed the situation.
It's a bit unfortunate that we're in the position that we are now, where players are still asking themselves, what are we striking for? What will happen if we strike, and what's the penalties if there are any?
Some club chairmen have threatened players with dismissal if they refuse to play in front of the cameras. If they're serious about that, they'll also need next week's court ruling to go in their favour.
It's not for the High Court to resolve the dispute itself, but it is for the High Court to rule now on the legality of a strike. So unless these two sides sort out their differences very quickly, there's bound to be one very sore loser. David Eads, BBC News at the High Court.
A new estimate by the head of the National CJD Surveillance Unit suggests that the number of people likely to die from the human form of BSE will be around 200. The research published in the journal Science bases its estimate on the fact that so far the majority of people to have died have been relatively young. So it assumes that older people are likely to be resistant to the disease.
Ever since a link was established between mad cow disease and the human brain disorder VCJD, scientists have been trying to work out if we're in for an epidemic. It's thought that most of us eating beef in the 80s could have consumed infected meat. After that date, the risky material was removed at the abattoir. Since then, 111 people have contracted VCJD. So the big question has been whether most of us are safe, or if the disease just has such a long incubation period that we're only just seeing the earliest cases. This is the CJD Surveillance Unit in Edinburgh, the group that monitors the progress of the disease. The head of the unit, Dr. Robert Will, says his new figure is based on the fact that most of those who caught the disease have been young. The average age of those who died was 28, suggesting they were actually infected in their teens. He believes that most of those young people have now shown the symptoms, and older people have a much greater immunity. In short, we're over the peak. Previously, scientists have estimated that we could see as many as 130,000 fatalities from VCJD. To them, the figure of merely 205 looks very optimistic, particularly when we can't be certain of the incubation period. Tom Heap, BBC News.
The Tories now say that improving public services is more important than cutting taxes. The Shadow Chancellor, Michael Howard, marked what's a significant change of priorities at a news conference in London. He said the Conservatives were developing a new range of policies right across the public services.
Time today for the Tories to change their tune. They admit they got it wrong at the election. Too much talk of tax cuts, not enough about public services. Now they've made the switch. Next time, tax cuts would have to wait.
Our most pressing problem in this country now is to tackle our public services. That has to be our #1 priority. It has to take precedence over everything else. And I'm therefore not saying now that we will absolutely be in a position at the next election to promise immediate tax cuts. I don't know, but I do know that we've got to improve the public services.
The Tories still have a long way to go to redefine the party. Conservatives, like the health spokesman Liam Fox, are using trips to Europe, to Paris and today to Berlin to argue that Britain has a lot to learn, especially about using the private sector. But today's policy shift was what some, like the Tories' defeated leadership contender, wanted all along.
What Michael Howard is saying today is very much in line with what I was saying during the leadership campaign, and I think it will strike people as common sense. First priority is keeping the economy running properly and stopping it slowing down too much. The next priority is getting our public services in a much better state than they are now. Tax cuts comes after that, and I must say, in present economic circumstances, I don't expect to see tax cuts very soon.
The Tory leader, a visitor to the Scottish Parliament today, accepts the notion that oppositions don't win elections, governments lose them. Ian Duncan-Smith is convinced that Labour will fail in the end to deliver the better services that people want. When and if that happens, the Tories are hoping the public will finally be ready to look to them for solutions. They seem to realise they still have a lot of persuading to do. John Pienaar, BBC News, Tory Central Office.
The latest GCSE school league tables for England have been released, and for the first time some will be based on more than just results. 200 schools have published a value-added rating showing how far pupils have progressed. Teachers say it's a fairer way of showing how schools are performing.
16-year-old Jahan Zeb works hard. He's expected to get 10 good GCSEs, but that wasn't always the case.
I used to be in the bottom sets, but after a lot of hard work, I'm in the top sets now.
Jahan's school in Oldham serves a poor community. Overall, this school doesn't get good exam results, but the pupils' rate of progress is faster than the national average. And for the first time, that progress is being recognised in the league tables. It means parents can see how much this school is helping students like Jahan to improve. Like every GCSE candidate here, Jahan's work is closely monitored.
What sorts of worries do you have?
I might miss the target.
You might miss your target grade.
Yeah.
And his teacher is delighted this school is not just being judged by raw exam results.
Teachers have recognised that simply comparing schools against each other in 5A to Cs is unfair. It's not comparing like with like. And certainly I welcome the move where we're looking at a value-added approach.
So does Jahan think his school has added value?
I'm hoping to go to sixth form college and to do physics, maths and IT, and hopefully go on to university and get a degree in engineering. Before I would never dreamt of this.
I'm sorry, we're going to have to come out of that piece and go straight to the Corn Exchange in Ipswich, where the result of that by-election has been announced.
The number of votes cast for each of the candidates at this election is as follows. David Allen Cooper, 581. Peter John Julian Leach, 152. Christopher David Mole, 11,881. Tessa Jane Munt, 6,146. John Paul Ramirez, 236. Anthony Charles Slade, 255. Paul Martin West, 7,794. Nicholas Winskill, 84. Jonathan Peter Wright, 276. And I declare that Christopher David Mole is duly elected to serve as Member of Parliament for the Ipswich constituency.
So that's the result there in Ipswich. As expected, the Labour candidate, Chris Mole, was returned to the seat. 11,881 votes. Paul West, the Tory, the Conservative candidate, came second, 7,794. He managed to cut the majority there, the majority in June at the general election being 8,000, so that's cut by some 4,000. And quite a respectable third place for the Lib Dems, Tessa Munt, their candidate, at 6,146. It was always going to be a bit of a fight for second place. It was expected that the Labour candidate would win. Now what we're seeing there is a laser show put on by Ipswich Town, part of its campaign to turn itself into a city on a night when many significant things are happening in Ipswich. It's all happening in Ipswich because, of course, they've had that big UEFA Cup match and beat Inter Milan, much to everyone's amazement and enormous gratification in Ipswich Town. It's really eclipsed the political events of this evening. But we'll soon, in a moment or two, we'll have the speech by Chris Mole, the Labour victor. Let's bring in now our political correspondent, Laura Trevelyan, who's there. Laura, what do you make of all of this?
Well, quite an interesting result, really, actually. The big story there, if anything, the fact that the Liberal Democrats have really leapt up from being a very poor third in June to being a rather less than poor third today. But Labour really holding on quite comfortably there. The Conservatives hanging on to second place and the Liberal Democrats in third. An interesting result, I think, also in terms of the turnout. 40.26% was the turnout. That compares to a turnout of 59% in the general election in June. So this wasn't too bad a turnout. Quite a lot of heckling going on there. We were just hearing Chris Mole, who is the successful Labour MP, who's trying to speak, but there's an awful lot of heckling going on there. I'm just trying to work out who the heckling's from my vantage point. But Chris Mole, the new Labour MP, speaking now.
Of Ipswich have delivered the right results. It's a great Ipswich double and a great night for Labour too. But it's a terrible night for Ian Duncan-Smith and the Tories. His first hurdle as party leader, and he's fallen. Make no mistake, Ipswich is a marginal seat that the Tories had to take back in the general election to form a working majority. Ipswich rejected Tory boom and bust in June, and today Ipswich has rejected Tory cuts in public services again. Instead, our town has voted for Labour's investment in Ipswich schools and hospitals to continue. Today we have police numbers on the streets of Ipswich up for the first time in years. We have a new accident and emergency unit and some of the best cancer treatments in Europe at Heathrow Hospital. We've seen the first new schools built in Ipswich for 25 years. And we have the lowest interest rates, lowest mortgages and lowest jobless figures since before the Beatles were at number one. But there's much more to do. Tonight, it's a huge honour to be asked by the voters of my town to carry on the good work of Jamie Cann that he did for Ipswich. Frankly, I wish Jamie were still with us and that this by-election hadn't been needed. As your MP, I promise to work hard to serve Ipswich and to be your champion. The work starts right now. I'd like to thank the other candidates who ran a fair and decent fight that befits the tradition of Ipswich. Thank you to Suffolk Police for their hard work during this election. And thank you to James Hare and all his staff for putting IP City on the national map tonight and organising this count so efficiently. And finally, thanks to my agent, Peter Watts, and Labour's entire campaign team, who have helped deliver this fantastic victory for Ipswich tonight. Thank you.
Chris Moll there, with his victory speech, the obligatory thanks to all involved, and trailing along in the clouds of glory of Ipswich Town FC with saying that's a great Ipswich double tonight. Now we're going to hear Paul West, the Tory candidate.
This evening and make sure this evening ran smoothly. I'd also like to thank the police for their efforts, also in view of the fact that they had the football match to contend with as well this evening. Also thanks to the guys who put on the very new and innovative display here that we've all enjoyed this evening as well. Can I just say, ladies and gentlemen, that it's been a great privilege to stand as the Conservative candidate at this election. The campaign of all the main political parties was a fair one. I extend my congratulations to the winner this evening, Chris Moll, and wish him well in leading Ipswich as the Member of Parliament. I would just like to say that the people of Ipswich have extended the goodwill shown to the Labour government to give them another chance, but I think they're expecting the Labour Party to deliver on public services, and they'll be watching very carefully to see the delivery in the next 4 or 5 years, rather than the anti-Conservative rhetoric that the winning candidate slipped into midway through his speech. Finally, may I thank all my team, all the people who voted for me today as the Conservative candidate, and everybody who took part in this election over the last 3 weeks. From my point of view, it's been a great privilege to have taken part. Thanks very much indeed.
Paul West there, the defeated Conservative candidate, and I should just remind you that you can watch the speeches of the other defeated candidates on BBC Interactive. If you're in a digital home, you can just press a red button and you can listen to those remaining speeches. Now let's bring in our political correspondent Laura Trevelyan, who's at the... Laura, we heard Chris Moll, the victor there, saying it's a terrible night for Ian Duncan-Smith. His analysis that this is a failure of leadership on the Tories' part. Is that fair?
Well, that's obviously the analysis that you would expect the Labour Party to come up with, of the fact that the Tories didn't win this by-election. I think it would have been disastrous for the Tories if they had slipped into third place behind the Liberal Democrats. What is not good news for the Tories is the fact that the Liberal Democrats were only 1,600 votes behind them when they were a significantly bigger figure behind in June. I can hear the Liberal Democrat candidate behind me also saying it's a bad night for Ian Duncan-Smith. Not as bad as if they'd come third, but obviously not a superb result for the Tories. An interesting election overall, I think, in the fact this has been a very low-key by-election, but not a bad turnout, over 40%, especially considering the kind of turnout that we've been used to. And Chris Moll, the new Labour MP for Ipswich there, being very severely heckled during his acceptance speech by some people who wanted to stop the war, they were shouting. So this by-election has taken place against a backdrop of a conflict in Afghanistan, but despite that, and the fact that normal politics has effectively been suspended, a reasonably healthy interest in politics demonstrated by this turnout tonight.
Laura, thanks very much. We'll leave it there. And we're going to go over to Westminster now, where Andrew Neil is going to discuss this further.
Carrie Gracie, thank you for that. Here in Westminster, we've got Angela Smith, a Labour whip who has been campaigning at Ipswich. He just came back from it today. We've got Andrew Rosindell, who is a Conservative MP, one of the few Conservatives to actually win a Labour seat in the election of June of this year. He won Romford, much to many people's surprise. And Tim Razzall for the Liberal Democrats, who organised the Liberals' pretty successful election campaign in June of this year. Angela Smith, Labour's held on to this seat, but your vote is down from 51% to 43%. It's not a great result for you.
I think it's a very good result, and I'm sure Chris Moll is absolutely delighted. Now, Jamie Cann had been the Member of Parliament for a number of years. He got a personal vote and a following. Chris is a new candidate. I think we're very pleased. What I'm surprised about, I would have thought if there was any sign of a Tory revival at all, we'd have seen the Tories doing better. It seems to me they've slipped down. The Lib Dems have taken their place in some ways, if not overtaken them, but getting very close.
Well, I mean, that is the point, Andrew Rosindell. The real losers tonight are the Tories. This was Ian Duncan Smith's first test as party leader, his first by-election. He failed.
No. Labour result was actually 3 times lower than ours. 8% drop in their vote, 3% drop in our vote.
You almost came third. You just scraped in ahead of the Lib Dems.
People vote for the Liberals in by-elections. We see that almost in every by-election that takes place. This is no different. Often they look around for the party they think is going to most likely beat the incumbent, and hence the Liberals have picked up votes in this particular by-election. There's nothing new in that.
But why was there not? I mean, there was a 3% swing to the Tories, which is minimal. Why was there not a bigger swing to the Conservatives several months after the election campaign, when the government's been accused of not delivering on public services, saying it's going into the euro now, when very few British people want to do that, and yet the Tories failed to capitalise on it?
Quite simply, we've had a few months now where politics has not been real. We've not had the knockabout in politics recently that we've been used to. And it's a by-election, and people will vote for a party in a by-election that they wouldn't necessarily vote for in a general election. A Liberal vote is where people tend to go in by-elections. There's nothing special about that. There's nothing earth-shattering about that news this evening.
So let me just get this right. The Tories are saying that they're happy tonight with the result, in which your share of the vote has fallen, and that you've just held on to second and no more in a seat where the Liberal Democrats have never come anywhere.
I didn't say we were happy about it. I'm just facing reality that this is a by-election. In by-elections, people do tend to do this. And
I just wanted to check.
A 3% drop is not that bad compared to an 8% drop that the Labour Party have suffered.
You're supposed to be gaining on us these days.
I mean, the Lib Dems here, Tim Razzall, this is not a bad result for you. I mean, you had no hope of winning this seat. You didn't come second, but that was a tall order. But you added 7% to your share of the vote, and you almost came second.
Yes, I mean, clearly we're in politics to win, and we came third, so therefore we can't be self-congratulatory. I wonder what Andrew was going to say on behalf of the Tory party. I thought he did quite a good fist of it, I must say. I wonder what he was going to say. The truth is, this is a disastrous result for the Tory party. I mean, as David Davis, the chairman of the Tory party, said only last week, this is a real test for Ian Duncan Smith, and if the Tories do not do well in Ipswich, that's a real failure for his leader. The chairman of the Tory party said it, and that is actually what has happened. And for Andrew to say, oh, everybody votes the Lib Dems in by-elections, that is not what normally happens to the third party in by-elections. Normally the party that's third in the general election, as we were, way, way behind the other two parties, gets squeezed. This time we went up 8-9%, and that is a lot to do with people not wanting to vote for the Tory party.
Well, Angela Smith, voters have left the two big parties to go to the third party today. They often do that when the third party has a chance of winning. They went to the third party in Ipswich even though they knew they had no chance of winning.
I think you always, I would disagree with Tim. We do find in by-elections Liberals do perform better than they do in general elections. That's a known fact. It happens in local authority by-elections as well. I'm just surprised at Andrew not being sort of so more despondent than he is. Now, if you look at the results over the years, you'll see that Ipswich is one of those seats.
He's a cheerful chap.
He has to try harder tonight. Well, you'll tell your guy in Ipswich. You need to tell your guy in Ipswich how to do it. But I think Ipswich is actually 174th on the Tory target list, and that's the seat they have to win to get an overall majority. Now, clearly, I'd be very happy to see a 3% swing for the Tories at next election. I'd be in for life, practically. So it really isn't any sort of movement forward.
Not a great night for politics all around, though, is it? Only 40% voted, which these days some people think is high, but it's terrible compared to previous
politicians never expect great nights on by-elections, but I think Chris Moore will be very pleased with the result tonight. I think 40% is a very sort of good result in many ways. We were being told just earlier in the week it could have been less. I was there today, it was freezing cold, I got rained on. Those are things that do affect the turnout, and yet we're seeing a better turnout than anybody anticipated. Even you were surprised by it.
That's only because you'd told me it was going to be lower and you'd been in Ipswich. I haven't. Andrew Rosindell, at the very least, we can say tonight that the Tory revival has not begun.
Today in Ipswich, the people were not electing a government. They were electing an MP to fill a vacancy that had occurred.
That's what we call a by-election,
yeah,
I think.
But I don't
normally protest in by-elections.
Well, I don't believe that people going to vote today actually thought about what they were doing in terms of the government. They were choosing a local MP, and in many cases they do tend to vote for the middle-of-the-road party, or the party they perceive as being the middle-of-the-road party, and that's what they've done again.
You would have to say, though, many people never think it could happen, that the Lib Dems are creeping up, that they could well, if they carry on like this, even in seats like that, they'll be replacing you as the second party quite soon. No? Tim Razzall, is that?
Yes, well, we started half the Tory vote in the 2001 election. We're now within 1,000 in Ipswich. We're now within 1,000 votes. It is a very, very significant step, in particular in by-elections, where normally the party that was third going into the by-election gets seriously squeezed, and that's a very good result for us.
OK, thank you. Thank you all very much indeed. Thanks for staying up. They've been on since Dispatch Box earlier this evening on BBC Two. Let's go back to News 24 and Carrie Gracie.
Thanks, Andrew. And we're going to go straight over now to the Corn Exchange in Ipswich, where Laura Trevelyan is standing by with the victor beside her.
That's right, I'm joined by Chris Mull, the victorious new Labour MP for Ipswich. Congratulations.
Thank you very much.
I have to say, though, your vote down 8.1% since June. Not really astounding success, is it?
Oh, I think 4,000 is a good majority in the circumstances. I mean, the Do merchants were predicting very low turnouts. We've got 40.26% of the people of Ipswich come out and vote, much, much higher than many of the by-elections in the last Parliament. And a 4,000 majority is a good solid one in the circumstances.
Of course, the extraordinary story tonight was the football. The fact that Ipswich Town managed to win against the odds against Inter Milan. But, you know, in the end, actually, more people voted than went to the football, so you must be pleased about that.
Well, that's right. Again, you know, people were saying more people were watching the football than going to vote, and that's not been the case. And, you know, Ipswich is a place that takes its civic duty seriously, and I'm just really pleased that so many have come out and voted, and I've got a good majority.
So what sort of a Labour MP are you going to be when you get to Westminster? Are you going to be obedient and loyal, or are you going to be a member of the awkward squad?
Oh, I'm going to be someone who wants to stick up for Ipswich first and foremost. I mean, everybody knew Jamie Cann as an MP who worked very hard for his constituents and represented the town very well at Westminster, and that's exactly what I want to do.
Where would you have voted, for example, this week on, you know, for example, the government, the derogation from the Human Rights Act? The government is going to suspend that briefly for some terrorist suspects. Would you have been in favour of that? Or?
I mean, in extraordinary circumstances, I believe extraordinary measures are necessary, and so I would have been able to support that bill.
So you're not going to be a rebel?
Well, we'll see how it goes, but I mean, Ipswich is a place that expects its MP to have their own mind and stick up for the town, and that's exactly what I'm going to do.
Another interesting result, of course, tonight is the Liberal Democrats coming pretty close to you, only 1,600 votes behind the Tories, so you're losing out a lot of votes there to Liberal Democrats.
Well, I mean, to be honest, the Tories and the Lib Dems were fighting tooth and nail for second place. I mean, I've never seen anything like it. It was a complete scrap. And, you know, the Tories nearly got pushed into third place, but not quite. I mean, it's a complete disaster for Ian Duncan Smith on his first outing in the since he became leader, and quite frankly, you know, to nearly come third is a pretty poor result for the Tories.
But doesn't it show you, though, the fact that there was, you know, the Liberal Democrat vote is up 7.1%. There must be Labour voters out there who feel you're not delivering, and they were willing to lend their votes to the Lib Dems this time.
Well, the Lib Dems have been here promising anything and everything to everyone without a costing to any of it, and you know, frankly, I think that will all unravel over time, and come the next election, those people will be back recognising Labour's solid delivery. We've got 2 new schools in Ipswich for the first time. We've got a new accident emergency unit, investment going into our hospital here, and people are really positive about it.
But would you accept that more needs to be done?
Of course more needs to be done. I mean, that's you know, the challenge that Labour faces, always to do more for the people of Britain, always to do more for the people of Ipswich, but only because we've got the economy right, we've got the public finances in a healthy state, are we actually able to deliver on things, you know, that quite frankly people haven't seen for a long while, and they very much welcome them.
And where do you stand on the single European currency? The Prime Minister's going to be really nailing his colours to the mast in a speech in Birmingham a little later today. Are you in favour of the single currency? Will it help Ipswich going in, or have you got any reservations?
No, we've got a lot of high-tech businesses that export and find you know, markets overseas, and it's very important to them that they're part of a stable currency, and I'm all in favour of you know, entering the single currency, as long as the convergence criteria are right, as long as it's in Britain's interest, as long as it means we're going to sustain, you know, more jobs in Britain in the way that it should do.
And just the last question, you were heckled a bit tonight by the Socialist Alliance. I think it's good preparation for Westminster, though, isn't it?
Well, absolutely. I mean, it's you know, a bit of an irrelevance, really, frankly. You know, half a dozen people coming in and shutting their mouths off. If that's what it's like in Westminster, well, maybe I've had a brave introduction to it tonight.
Chris Mull, new Labour MP for Ipswich. Thanks very much indeed for joining us. And now, Carrie, back to you.
Laura, many thanks. Now the headlines at 1:15. Chris Moll has held Ipswich for Labour in the first by-election since the general election. No surrendering can do's. The onslaught continues against the Taliban, despite earlier hopes of a negotiated surrender. And Downing Street denies claims in this morning's Sun that Tony Blair wants a Euro referendum in 2005. Now, the other big Ipswich story. Here's Andrew Cotter.
Hello again. We'll start with the UEFA Cup, and it was a good night for one of England's former winners of the tournament. Ipswich have set themselves up well for a second leg against Inter Milan in the San Siro. A late goal from Alan Armstrong at Portman Road gave the home side a valuable 1-0 victory.
Perhaps because so many of the pundits had already written off their chances, struggling Ipswich produced some of their best play of the season in a first half that had the aristocrats of Internazionale rattled from the off. Titus Bramble, under pressure, steered a great early chance wide. The Italians' rare forays into the Ipswich box did, however, force Matteo Sereni into the save from Nicola Ventola. But despite ample possession and pressure, Ipswich disappointed where it mattered, and it took until the 44th minute before Matt Holland forced Francesco Toldo to make a save. Pablo Cunhago underlined the fact that Ipswich's cutting edge is pretty dull at the moment. A fine through ball from Sixto Peralta squandered by the Spaniard. And when Cunhago returned the compliment, Peralta dithered long enough for the ball to be cleared. But just as it was looking as if Ipswich would be frustrated, George Burley pulled an ace from up his sleeve, throwing on Alan Armstrong. The substitute rose to head the winner past Toldo in the 81st minute.
I think all the team deserved praise. You know, everybody played their part. I mean, even first half, I thought, you know, we had most of the play. But whatever, it's half-time, but we're going to enjoy tonight.
A well-earned first home win in Europe this season for the Tractor Boys, but it'll take more of the same to hang on in the San Siro. Keith York, BBC News.
And there was a good result also for Leeds United.